She left him for her boss. Years later, her boss worked for him. The crystal chandeliers scattered rivers of golden light across the ballroom, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters drifted through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne, and executives in tailored suits exchanged polished smiles that hid sharper ambitions beneath. Daniel Carter stood quietly near the entrance, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal suit. He hadn't been invited because anyone wanted to see him. He had been invited because someone wanted him to remember exactly where he belonged. Across the room, laughter erupted. Sophia, his ex-wife. She looked exactly as she had the day she walked away 5 years ago. Beautiful, elegant, impossible to ignore. The diamond necklace around her neck reflected the lights like frozen stars. Standing beside her was Richard Bennett, her boss, the man she had left Daniel for. Richard wrapped an arm confidently around Sophia's waist before raising his champagne glass toward a group of investors. Daniel watched without expression. Inside, something old stirred. Not anger, not jealousy, only memory. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe the greatest revenge is becoming someone they can no longer understand, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, back to Daniel. 5 years earlier, their apartment had been filled with cardboard boxes and unpaid bills. Daniel was a software engineer earning enough to survive, but never enough to satisfy Sophia's growing dreams. Every morning, he woke before sunrise. Every evening, he returned after dark. He cooked dinner. He cleaned. He listened. He apologized for things that weren't really his fault. Sophia worked as Richard Bennett's executive assistant at Sterling Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing technology firms in Chicago. At first, she admired Richard. Then she envied his lifestyle. Eventually, she compared every successful man to her husband. You know what Richard drove to work today? Daniel smiled while washing dishes. I don't. A Bentley. The faucet continued running. He bought it without even asking the price. Daniel nodded politely. That's nice. She stared at his reflection in the kitchen window. You know what you drive? Our Honda still works. She laughed. Not because it was funny. Because disappointment had become her favorite language. Exactly. Weeks became months. The comparisons never stopped. Richard traveled to Paris for meetings. Daniel skipped lunch to save money. Richard wore Italian suits. Daniel repaired the same pair of shoes 3 times. Richard owned penthouses. Daniel dreamed of one day paying off their student loans. One Friday evening, Sophia invited Daniel to Sterling Dynamics' annual executive gala. I think it'll be good for you. Daniel smiled. I've never liked formal parties. I know. She looked at him carefully. Maybe seeing successful people will motivate you. The words landed gently. Their meaning did not. At the gala, Daniel borrowed his brother's old tuxedo. The sleeves were slightly too short. The shoes pinched his feet. Still, he held Sophia's hand proudly as they entered the ballroom. Richard noticed them almost immediately. Well, his smile carried expensive confidence. Sophia. She kissed him lightly on the cheek. Daniel pretended not to notice. Richard looked him up and down. So this is the famous husband. Daniel extended his hand. Daniel. Richard ignored it. I've heard you're a programmer. Daniel lowered his hand. I am. Richard chuckled. My nephew builds websites in high school. Several executives laughed politely. Sophia laughed too. Just enough. Just long enough. Daniel smiled anyway. The evening became worse. Richard introduced billion-dollar investors. Sophia stood proudly beside him. Daniel wandered alone near the buffet. When the speeches ended, Richard stepped onto the stage. We'd like to recognize employees who've contributed exceptionally this year. Applause filled the room. Sophia received an award. Richard hugged her. Then he leaned toward the microphone. Sophia once told me something. The audience quieted. She said success isn't about where you start. He looked directly at Daniel. It's about knowing when you're surrounded by people holding you back. Scattered. Laughter echoed. Daniel felt dozens of eyes turned toward him. Sophia didn't correct him. She simply smiled. On the drive home, neither spoke. Rain tapped gently against the windshield. Finally, Daniel asked, Did you mean it? Sophia stared through the passenger window. I don't know. You laughed. Silence. You didn't defend me. More silence. Then, I can't keep pretending I'm happy. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. What are you saying? I'm tired. Of what? Waiting. His voice softened. For what? For you to become someone. He didn't answer, because deep inside, he had feared those exact words for years. 3 weeks later, she handed him divorce papers. There were no tears, only signatures. You deserve someone who believes in your future, Daniel said quietly. Sophia shook her head. No. She looked him directly in the eyes. I deserve someone who already has one. She removed her wedding ring, placed it carefully on the table, walked away. Daniel never chased her. He watched the apartment door close. Then he sat alone until sunrise. For months, he lived in a tiny studio apartment above an old laundromat. The washing machines downstairs rumbled through the night like distant thunder. He ate instant noodles, worked freelance coding jobs, sold his watch, sold his motorcycle, sold almost everything except one laptop. Every evening, he opened the same folder. Project Atlas, an artificial intelligence logistics platform he'd spent 7 years secretly developing. During his marriage, he'd delayed finishing it. Sophia wanted vacations, new furniture, luxury dinners. Daniel always chose overtime instead of his own dream. Now, there was no one left to postpone it for. Pain became routine. Routine became discipline. At midnight, while the city slept, his apartment window remained illuminated by the pale blue glow of computer screens. He failed. Again and again. Investors rejected him. Banks refused loans. Friends stopped answering calls. One investor actually laughed. The technology is brilliant. Daniel looked hopeful. But you're not the man who can build $1 billion company. Daniel thanked him anyway. Every rejection strengthened something invisible. He stopped caring about proving people wrong. He focused on proving himself right. Meanwhile, Sophia's life appeared perfect. Social media displayed luxury vacations, private yachts, business-class flights, designer handbags, anniversary dinners with Richard. Thousands of strangers envied her. None of them noticed she smiled less in every new photograph. Richard wasn't affectionate. He was possessive. He wasn't loyal. He was practical. To him, people were investments. And investments were replaced whenever better opportunities appeared. Sophia ignored every warning sign, because expensive cages still looked beautiful from the outside. 3 years later, Daniel finally received one unexpected email. Subject: We'd like to meet. The sender was Horizon Capital, one of Silicon Valley's largest investment firms. Their managing partner wrote only one sentence. We believe Project Atlas could change global logistics. Daniel stared at the screen for nearly a minute, then quietly closed his laptop. Not because he wasn't excited, because he had learned never to celebrate before the work was finished. He attended the meeting wearing the same inexpensive navy suit he'd owned for years. The investors expected confidence. Instead, they found clarity. Daniel didn't exaggerate. He didn't promise impossible growth. He simply explained how every supply chain in the world wasted billions through outdated prediction systems. When he finished, the room remained silent. Finally, the oldest investor smiled. You know why everyone before us rejected you? Daniel shook his head. They thought you were selling software. He leaned forward. But you're selling the future. 6 months later, Horizon Capital invested $80 million. Project Atlas became Atlas Intelligence. Within 4 years, it transformed freight management across 3 continents. Shipping companies reduced losses. Hospitals received emergency supplies faster. Governments signed contracts. Business magazines called its mysterious founder the Invisible CEO. Daniel rarely accepted interviews. He never posted photos. He never discussed his past. He simply kept building. And, somewhere across the city, neither Sophia nor Richard had any idea who now owned the company, quietly purchasing competitors across the technology industry. They were too busy trying to save Sterling Dynamics, unaware that salvation was already coming. And it carried a name they had both forgotten. Sophia first noticed the name Atlas Intelligence during an emergency executive meeting. The conference room that once buzzed with effortless confidence had fallen strangely quiet. Half-finished cups of expensive coffee sat untouched. Financial reports covered the polished walnut table. Every page looked worse than the last. Revenue had fallen for 6 consecutive quarters. Several international clients had terminated contracts. Sterling Dynamics, once considered one of the brightest stars in the technology industry, was slowly suffocating beneath years of arrogant leadership and poor decisions. Richard Bennett loosened his tie. For the first time since Sophia had met him, he looked tired. Not physically, professionally. We've exhausted every option, the chief financial officer said carefully. We've cut costs. We've reduced staff. We've sold 2 divisions. Richard rubbed his forehead. So what's left? The room remained silent until another executive cleared his throat. There is one possibility. Every head turned. Atlas Intelligence. Richard frowned. The logistics company? They're no longer just a logistics company. The executive projected a presentation onto the massive screen. Over the last 4 years, Atlas Intelligence had quietly acquired cybersecurity firms, cloud infrastructure companies, AI laboratories, semiconductor manufacturers, and data analytics startups across North America and Europe. Each acquisition had seemed unrelated. Until now, together, they formed something enormous. An ecosystem, a technological empire. Sophia watched the presentation in silence. She had heard the company's name before. Everyone had. But its founder remained almost mythical. No magazine had successfully interviewed him. No television appearance. No glamorous charity galas. No endless social media posts displaying private jets and luxury watches. Only results. Only growth. Only success. Richard leaned back. Arrange a meeting. The executive hesitated. They've already contacted us. Richard smiled. Good. They're interested in acquiring Sterling. The smile disappeared. Acquiring. Yes. Richard laughed softly. We don't need rescuing. The CFO slowly slid another financial report across the table. We actually do. For several long seconds. Nobody spoke. Richard finally stood. If Atlas wants to negotiate. He forced confidence into his voice. They'll negotiate with me. Across town, Daniel stood alone inside the top floor of Atlas Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline. The city stretched endlessly beneath the morning sunlight. Employees moved quietly outside his office. Few had ever spoken to him directly. Most simply knew him as Mr. Carter. A calm man. A private man. The founder who remembered every employee's name but rarely talked about himself. His assistant entered carrying a tablet. The Sterling acquisition team is ready. Daniel nodded. Any updates? They accepted the meeting. He looked back toward the city. No surprises. She hesitated. Sir. He waited. The CEO of Sterling is Richard Bennett. Daniel remained completely still. Almost too still. And the executive assistant attending with him. She glanced down at her notes. Sophia Bennett. Daniel quietly corrected her. Her last name used to be Carter. The assistant looked surprised. You know her? Daniel smiled faintly. I used to. Nothing more. No bitterness. No explanation. Just 4 words. Then he picked up a folder and walked toward the boardroom. Sophia spent nearly an hour choosing her outfit that morning. Dark navy dress. Pearl earrings. Simple heels. Richard noticed. You seem nervous. I'm curious. About what? The CEO. Richard smirked. They're probably another billionaire desperate to be admired. Sophia smiled politely. But something about Atlas Intelligence felt different. There were no magazine covers. No gossip columns. No extravagant interviews. Success without noise. Power without performance. She couldn't explain why. But she respected that. Their car stopped before Atlas Tower. The building wasn't the tallest in Chicago, nor the most extravagant. Yet it possessed something more intimidating. Confidence. No giant logo covered the entrance. No golden statues decorated the lobby. Only clean glass. Steel. Silence. The receptionist greeted them warmly. Good morning, Mr. Bennett. Richard straightened his jacket. We're here to meet your CEO. Of course. She smiled. Please follow me. The elevator climbed without music. Without conversation. Richard checked his watch repeatedly. Sophia studied the city outside the glass walls. Something about this place felt peaceful. Like everyone here worked because they believed in something rather than because they feared losing something. The boardroom doors opened. Several executives stood as Richard entered. Sophia followed. Large windows overlooked the skyline. Fresh flowers rested in the center of the table. Coffee had already been prepared. Everything appeared perfectly organized. Except, the chair at the head of the table remained empty. Richard glanced around. Your CEO is late. One executive smiled politely. He'll be here shortly. Richard sighed dramatically. I suppose billionaires enjoy making entrances. Sophia looked toward the hallway. Footsteps approached. Steady. Unhurried. The door opened. Daniel walked inside carrying nothing except a thin leather notebook. For a second, nobody moved. Sophia blinked once. Then again. No, it couldn't be. Richard frowned. His expression shifted from confusion to amusement. Daniel. He laughed. What are you doing here? Daniel calmly placed his notebook on the table. Working. Richard chuckled louder. I had no idea Atlas hired former software engineers. Several executives exchanged awkward glances. Sophia couldn't stop staring. Daniel looked different. Not because of expensive clothing. His suit was elegant but understated. His watch was simple. No jewelry. No obvious display of wealth. The difference was impossible to describe. Years ago, he'd always entered rooms hoping to be accepted. Now, he entered rooms assuming he belonged. Richard leaned back confidently. So, he smiled. What position do you have? Here. Daniel met his eyes. I built software. I remember. Richard laughed. I'm asking what you do now. Daniel answered with complete calm. I make decisions. Richard looked around the room. So you're a department manager? No response. Vice president. Still silence. Richard smirked. You've done well for yourself. Daniel simply pulled out a chair. Not beside anyone. At the head of the table. Richard laughed again. I think you're in the wrong seat. Nobody joined him. The room remained perfectly silent. Sophia slowly noticed something strange. Every Atlas executive was watching Daniel. Not casually. Respectfully. The kind of respect that couldn't be purchased. Only earned. Richard finally frowned. Someone should explain the seating arrangement. Before anyone could answer, the boardroom doors opened once more. Atlas Intelligence's chairman entered alongside several board members. Every executive stood immediately, including Daniel. The chairman smiled warmly before extending his hand. Good morning, Daniel. Daniel shook it. Good morning. Richard's confident smile began to fade. The chairman turned towards Sterling's delegation. Ladies and gentlemen. His voice filled the room effortlessly. Allow me to introduce the founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Atlas Intelligence. He smiled toward Daniel. Mr. Daniel Carter. Silence. Absolute silence. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. Richard stared as though language itself had abandoned him. Daniel. Her Daniel. The quiet man she once believed had no future, was standing at the head of one of the fastest-growing technology empires in the world. No dramatic music played. No applause erupted. There didn't need to be any. Because the truth itself was louder than every insult ever spoken. Daniel simply nodded politely. Please. He gestured toward the seats. Let's discuss your company's future. Richard couldn't move. His fingers remained frozen around the leather portfolio he'd carried into the meeting with such confidence only minutes earlier. For the first time in his career, he had entered a room believing he was the most powerful man inside it. He wasn't even close. Sophia lowered her eyes. Her heartbeat echoed loudly in her ears. She had imagined countless scenarios over the past 5 years. Running into Daniel at a grocery store. Passing him on a busy sidewalk. Perhaps hearing that he had finally found another ordinary job. Never. Not even once. Had she imagined this? Daniel sat calmly at the head of the 20-foot conference table. No expensive watch flashed beneath the lights. No custom-made gold pin rested in his hand. Nothing about him demanded attention. Yet somehow, everyone in the room instinctively looked toward him before speaking. That kind of authority couldn't be bought. It had to be earned. The chairman smiled. Mr. Bennett. He gestured toward Daniel. Mr. Carter has personally reviewed Sterling Dynamics over the past 6 months. Richard forced a smile. I see. Daniel opened a slim folder. Inside were fewer than 20 pages. No dramatic presentation. No unnecessary charts. Only facts. Sterling has exceptional engineers. He spoke evenly. Excellent patents. Strong client relationships. Richard straightened proudly. I agree. Daniel continued. But leadership has failed to protect those strengths. The room fell quiet. Our review found 12 major acquisitions that produced no strategic value. Another page turned. Executive turnover increased by 43%. Another page. Research spending decreased while executive compensation increased. Richard's jaw tightened. Daniel wasn't attacking him. That somehow made it worse. He was simply describing reality. The numbers did the judging for him. Richard leaned forward. Every company faces difficult years. Daniel nodded. True. But not every company loses its direction. Another executive from Atlas projected several graphs onto the screen. revenue, employee satisfaction, innovation index, client retention. Every graph pointed downward. Then another set appeared. Atlas Intelligence. The lines climbed steadily upward. Not dramatically, consistently, year after year. Sophia stared at the screen. Daniel had never chased explosive success. He had built something far more dangerous. Stability. The chairman folded his hands. Our board has unanimously approved an acquisition offer. Richard interrupted. We're not interested in selling. Daniel finally looked directly at him. His expression remained calm. I'm afraid that decision is no longer entirely yours. Richard frowned. What does that mean? Daniel slid another document across the polished table. Our investment group now owns 38% of Sterling's outstanding shares. Richard's eyes widened. When? Gradually. Through the public market. Over the past 11 months. Sophia felt a chill travel down her spine. 11 months. While Richard had been dismissing Atlas as another logistics company, Daniel had quietly become Sterling's largest shareholder. Without interviews. Without headlines. Without anyone noticing. Richard's voice hardened. You planned this. Daniel answered honestly. I prepared for it. There's a difference. You wanted revenge. For the first time, Daniel smiled. Not triumphantly. Almost sadly. If I wanted revenge. He closed the folder. I would have bought Sterling 5 years ago. Silence. I waited because I wanted to buy a company. He looked around the room. Not someone's humiliation. No one spoke. Even the air seemed heavier. Daniel stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. The city stretched endlessly beneath drifting clouds. When I left this company, he said quietly, I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. He turned back. Not because people underestimated me. He looked briefly toward Sophia. Because so many talented employees were working under leaders who valued appearances more than character. Several Sterling executives lowered their heads. They knew he wasn't wrong. Richard suddenly laughed. A short, bitter laugh. So what now? You fire everyone? You throw me out? You enjoy watching me fail? Daniel returned to the table. No. Richard looked confused. No. The best companies aren't built by humiliating people. Daniel slid a second document toward him. This is an employment agreement. Richard frowned. What? You'll remain with Sterling. The room became silent again. As regional operations director. Richard stared. Director? You expect me to report to someone else? Daniel met his eyes. Yes. My board believes your sales experience still has value. Richard's face turned crimson. You've got to be kidding. You want me working under your company? Daniel answered simply. I want competent people doing competent work. This position pays well. It includes full benefits. It also requires accountability. Richard slammed both hands onto the table. I was CEO. Daniel nodded once. I know. And now? Daniel's voice remained gentle. You'll have a manager. The irony hit with crushing force. Years ago, Richard had mocked Daniel for being just another programmer. Now, Richard himself would become another employee, working for the man he had once ridiculed. Sophia couldn't breathe. Every sentence felt like another mirror reflecting the past. Not because Daniel was cruel. Because he wasn't. That made everything infinitely more painful. If he had shouted, she could have defended herself. If he had insulted them, she could have called him petty. Instead, he treated everyone with the same quiet respect he had always possessed. The only difference. Now people listened. Richard pushed the contract away. I'll never work for you. Daniel nodded. That's your decision. He reached for another folder. If you decline, he calmly opened it. The board will proceed with restructuring. Several Sterling executives exchanged nervous glances. Daniel continued. Unfortunately, executive leadership responsible for the company's current financial condition would be released immediately. Richard understood. The choice wasn't really a choice. Either he accepted the demotion, or left with nothing. His shoulders slowly dropped. For the first time in years, confidence abandoned him. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. The chairman stood. We'll give your team 30 minutes to review the agreement. The Atlas executives quietly exited. Only Daniel remained behind, gathering his papers. Sophia watched him. 5 years ago, he would have looked at her, searching for approval. Today, he didn't seek anything from her at all. He simply organized his documents with the same patience he'd once shown while repairing old laptops at their kitchen table. After several moments, Richard muttered, I need some air. Without waiting for anyone, he walked out. The heavy doors closed behind him. For the first time in 5 years, Daniel and Sophia were alone. Neither spoke immediately. Outside the windows, helicopters crossed the skyline. Cars crawled through the streets below like streams of light. Finally, Sophia whispered, "You really did it." Daniel looked up. "I finished what I started." She smiled faintly through eyes that were already beginning to fill with tears. "I never believed." She stopped herself. "No, I chose not to believe." Daniel didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to explain. Only the quiet truth that had taken 5 years to arrive. Sophia remained standing beside the conference table long after the silence settled between them. She had imagined this moment so many times over the years. If they ever met again, she had convinced herself she would know exactly what to say. She would sound confident, graceful, untouched. Instead, every carefully rehearsed sentence disappeared. Daniel closed his notebook and slipped it into a leather portfolio. His movements were slow, unhurried, the same quiet patience she used to mistake for weakness. Now she finally understood what it really had been. Strength, the kind that didn't need witnesses. "I heard about Atlas," she said softly. "I just never knew." "You never asked," Daniel replied. There was no accusation in his voice, only truth. Sophia lowered her eyes. "No, I didn't." Years ago, she had stopped asking about his dreams. Stopped asking why he stayed awake until 3 in the morning. Stopped asking what filled the endless notebooks scattered across their apartment. She had assumed none of it mattered. Now she realized. She had stopped being curious about the man she married long before she stopped loving him. "I used to think," she whispered, "that ambition looked like Richard." Daniel listened quietly. The cars, the speeches, the expensive dinners, the attention. She gave a sad smile. "I didn't recognize real ambition because it never needed an audience." Daniel looked out across the skyline. Most people don't. Another silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Sophia finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that had lived inside her for 5 years. "Did you ever hate me?" Daniel thought about it carefully, long enough that she believed the answer might be yes. "When you left," he finally said, "I hated losing my family." He paused. "But I never hated you." She closed her eyes. "I hated myself. I kept wondering what I could have done differently. I replayed every conversation, every argument, every dinner. I searched for the exact moment I lost you." His voice remained calm. "Eventually, I realized something." She looked up. "I never lost you. You had already decided to leave long before you packed your bags." Tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. Because he was right. It hadn't happened in a single day. It had happened one comparison at a time. One criticism, one disappointed look, one sarcastic laugh, until respect quietly disappeared, and love followed it out the door. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped her lips. Daniel nodded politely. "I know." She blinked. "You know? You wouldn't still be standing here if you weren't." Her shoulders trembled. "I was so blind. I thought success meant never struggling. I thought rich people were happier. I thought." Her voice cracked. "I thought I deserved better." Daniel answered gently. "You deserved respect." She looked confused. "So did I." The sentence landed harder than anger ever could. Because it wasn't revenge. It was balance. The kind of balance created when someone finally learns their own worth. A soft knock interrupted them. Richard entered. His face had changed dramatically within the last 20 minutes. Gone was the confident executive who enjoyed humiliating people weaker than himself. He now looked like a man who had spent years climbing the wrong mountain. He glanced awkwardly between Daniel and Sophia. "I signed." Daniel accepted the folder. "Thank you." Richard hesitated. "I suppose." He struggled to finish the sentence. "I'll be reporting to your executive team." "You'll report to Vice President Emily Chun." Richard nodded. "When do I start?" "Monday." A bitter smile crossed Richard's face. "That's efficient." Daniel smiled faintly. "We have a lot of work to do." Richard looked around the room one final time. "I spent 15 years trying to become CEO." Daniel remained silent. "I thought once I got there, I'd finally feel successful." He laughed quietly. "I never did." For a brief moment, there was no rivalry, no arrogance. Only two men standing on opposite sides of very different choices. Daniel extended his hand. Richard stared at it. 5 years earlier, Daniel had offered this same gesture at the Sterling Gala. Richard had ignored it. Today, his own hand shook slightly as he accepted it. I'm sorry. The words were almost inaudible. Daniel shook his hand firmly. I appreciate that. Nothing more. No lecture. No reminder of the past. No victory speech. Richard slowly released his grip. I don't know if I deserve another chance. Daniel answered without hesitation. Neither did I. Richard looked at him. The difference, Daniel continued, is that someone gave me one. Richard quietly nodded before leaving the room. The heavy door closed once again. A week later, news of Atlas Intelligence's acquisition dominated every business publication in the country. Journalists praised Daniel Carter's strategic vision. Television analysts called it one of the smartest corporate turnarounds of the decade. Financial magazines searched desperately for personal stories about the mysterious billionaire. None found much. Daniel declined interviews, ignored invitations to celebrity events, refused magazine covers. His picture appeared only once, taken accidentally while he visited a warehouse to thank employees working the night shift. The image spread across the internet, not because of luxury, but because the billionaire CEO carried boxes beside workers who earned hourly wages. Comments flooded social media. He doesn't look like a billionaire. Exactly. He looks like a leader. Meanwhile, Sterling Dynamics slowly began recovering. Not through miracles. Through discipline. Waste disappeared. Engineers regained creative freedom. Projects once buried beneath office politics finally reached the market. Richard worked harder than anyone expected. No private office. No reserved parking. No executive privileges. Just work. Real work. For the first time in years, he learned what leadership looked like when it wasn't built on status. Months passed. One autumn evening, Daniel left headquarters later than usual. The city glowed beneath golden streetlights. As he stepped outside Atlas Tower, he noticed someone sitting quietly on a nearby bench. Sophia. She stood when she saw him. I wasn't sure you'd come out this way. I usually do. She smiled gently. I know. He walked closer. The cold evening breeze carried fallen leaves across the sidewalk. I accepted a teaching position, she said. Daniel looked pleasantly surprised. Really? She nodded. Business ethics. A small laugh escaped her. Ironic, isn't it? Not really. She looked at him. I want young people to understand something I learned too late. And what's that? She watched the lights reflecting on the river. Character compounds. Just like money. You don't lose someone in one terrible decision. You lose them through hundreds of small ones. Daniel smiled. I think your students will remember that. She reached into her purse and removed a tiny velvet box. His wedding ring. Perfectly polished. I kept it. For 5 years. I think. It belongs to you now. Daniel looked at the ring resting in her palm. The symbol of promises once broken. He gently closed her fingers around it. No. She frowned. It's yours. It belongs to your past. My future doesn't need it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sophia nodded slowly. I understand. She truly did. Not every apology repaired what had been broken. Some apologies simply allowed both people to walk away without carrying bitterness. Daniel offered a warm smile. I hope you're happy. She returned the smile. For the first time, I think I'm learning how. He nodded once. Good. A black sedan pulled quietly to the curb. The driver opened the rear door. Daniel stepped toward the car before. Pausing, without turning around, he said softly, You know, you didn't leave because I had no future. Sophia closed her eyes. She remembered those exact words from years ago. You left because you couldn't see one. A single tear rolled down her cheek. This time, she didn't wipe it away. Daniel entered the car. The door closed gently. As the vehicle disappeared into the evening traffic, Sophia remained standing beneath the streetlights. She didn't watch the billionaire drive away. She watched the man she had once underestimated disappear into the life he had built with patience, dignity, and unwavering belief in himself. For the first time in years, she wasn't mourning the husband she had lost. She was mourning the respect she had failed to give him when it mattered most. And Daniel? He never became successful to make his ex-wife regret leaving. He became successful the day he stopped asking the world to define his worth. Because the greatest revenge was never becoming richer than those who doubted you. It was becoming someone who no longer needed their approval.